852 people, dead in less than 1 hour, on a ferry between two European capitals in 1994. Not in a war zone, not in the developing world, in the Baltic Sea, between Estonia and Sweden, on a scheduled overnight crossing that ran every single day. The ship left port at 7 in the evening. By 2 in the morning, it was on the bottom of the sea. Of the 989 people on board, 650 never made it out of the ship. They were still in their cabins when it went under. No child under the age of 12 survived. The MS Estonia disaster is the deadliest peacetime shipwreck in European waters since the Titanic, and almost nobody outside Scandinavia has ever heard of it. The reason is not complicated. The passengers were mostly Swedish and Estonian. There were no Americans. There were no British. There was no James Cameron film. There was no orchestra playing on the deck. There was a 50-ton steel door that ripped off the front of the ship in a storm that the captain of the nearest ferry later described as a typical autumn night in the Baltic. My name is Arthur Graves, and using forensic AI reconstruction technology, I am standing on the vehicle deck of the MS Estonia on the evening of September 27, 1994. It is a car and passenger ferry, 155 meters long, operated by Estline on the overnight route between Tallinn, Estonia, and Stockholm, Sweden. There are 989 people on board. Most of them are in the bars, the restaurants, or already in their cabins. Above me, there is a band playing. Below me, there are cars, trucks, and cargo. In front of me, at the bow of the ship, there is a door. It weighs 50 tons. It is held in place by 3 locking mechanisms, and by 1 in the morning, it will be gone. The MS Estonia was built in 1980 at the Meyer Werft shipyard in Papenburg, West Germany. It is what the maritime industry calls a ro-ro ferry, short for roll-on, roll-off. The design is elegant in its efficiency. Vehicles drive onto the ship through a large door at the bow, park on the open vehicle deck, and drive off at the destination. There is no crane. There is no loading. Cars roll on, cars roll off. The design makes ferries fast, cheap, and profitable. It also makes them vulnerable in a way that most passengers never consider. The vehicle deck is one enormous open space running nearly the full length of the ship, with no internal walls or partitions to stop water from moving freely. If water enters the vehicle deck, it does not fill a compartment and stop. It moves. It sloshes from side to side like water in a bathtub. Engineers call this free surface effect, and it is one of the most dangerous phenomena in naval architecture. A relatively small amount of water, moving freely across a wide deck, can shift the center of gravity so rapidly that the ship rolls before anyone understands what is happening. The bow door on the Estonia is not a single piece. It is 2 pieces. The outer piece is the visor, a massive steel shell that lifts upward on hydraulic rams like the jaw of an animal, exposing the loading ramp behind it. The inner piece is the ramp itself, which folds down to create a bridge between the ship and the dock. When the ship is at sea, the visor closes over the ramp, and both are locked in position. The visor on the Estonia is held by 3 locking mechanisms. These locks were designed for a ship that would sail sheltered coastal routes in the Finnish archipelago. The Estonia is now sailing the open Baltic, a crossing of over 400 kilometers through waters that regularly produce swells of 4 to 6 meters. The visor was never designed for this. Nobody told the passengers. I want to be precise about what I just said. The locking mechanisms on the bow visor of this ship were engineered for a coastal route between islands. The ship was then sold, renamed, resold, and put on an open ocean crossing that it was never built for. A proper inspection of the bow visor, which was required by regulations, was never performed. If it had been, the flaws would have been discovered, and the ship would not have been certified to sail the Tallinn to Stockholm route. That is not my opinion. That is the conclusion of the official investigation. The certificate of seaworthiness was incorrect. The MS Estonia was, in the most literal sense, a disaster waiting to happen. The ship departs Tallinn at 7 p.m. on the evening of September 27, 1994, with 989 passengers and crew. The weather forecast calls for a storm, but nothing exceptional by Baltic standards. Wind speeds are around 20 meters per second. Waves are between 3 and 4 meters, building to 5 or 6 through the night. Every other scheduled ferry in the Baltic is sailing as normal. The Estonia leaves port with a slight starboard list caused by uneven cargo distribution, but this is noted and not considered dangerous. The passengers settle in for the night. Most will be asleep by midnight. At approximately 1 a.m. on September 28th, passengers near the bow hear a loud metallic bang. It sounds like a heavy wave hitting the hull, and in a sense, it is. The waves are striking the bow visor with enormous force. A crew member checks the indicator lights on the bridge, which show whether the visor and ramp are properly locked. The lights show no problem. What nobody knows is that the indicator system only monitors normal operation. It is not designed to detect the kind of failure that is currently underway. The locks on the visor are cracking. The metal is fatiguing. The visor is beginning to separate from the hull, and the lights on the bridge say everything is fine. Over the next 15 minutes, the banging intensifies. Passengers in the forward cabins feel the ship shuddering. Some get dressed. Most stay in bed. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the visor tears free. 50 tons of steel rip away from the bow and fall into the sea. As it separates, it pulls the loading ramp partially open behind it. Within seconds, Baltic Sea water is pouring onto the vehicle deck at a rate that engineers later estimate at hundreds of tons per minute. The free surface effect begins immediately. The water moves to starboard. The ship lists. More water enters. The list increases. More water enters. The process is self-accelerating and irreversible. The Estonia begins to die. Everything that happens from this point takes approximately 35 minutes. In 35 minutes, a 155-meter ferry carrying nearly 1,000 people will go from sailing normally to sitting on the bottom of the Baltic Sea. I want you to understand what that means for the people inside. The ship is listing to starboard. This means the floor is becoming a slope. Within minutes, the slope is 30 degrees. Corridors become slides. Stairways become cliffs. Doors that open inward cannot be opened because the angle of the ship is pressing them shut. The people in the lower cabins, the cheaper cabins, are the farthest from the outer decks and the most trapped. The lights are still on. The engines are still running. The ship is still moving forward through the water. But the floor is no longer the floor. Furniture is sliding across rooms. People are falling into walls. A survivor named Kent Harstedt later said, "In a matter of seconds, everything turned into total chaos." A mayday is sent at 1:22 a.m., but it is garbled and does not follow international distress formats, which delays the wider emergency response. The crew on the bridge is struggling to communicate. The list is now so severe that standing is nearly impossible. Some crew members attempt to direct passengers, but most passengers never receive any guidance. There are no announcements. There is no organized evacuation. The ship is dying too fast for procedure. The people who survive are, overwhelmingly, the people who were awake, who were near the outer decks, and who were young and physically strong enough to climb uphill through a ship that was rolling onto its side. Reaching the outer deck means climbing stairways that are now tilted at 45 degrees or more. pulling yourself up railings, stepping over people who have fallen and cannot get up. Some passengers make it to the deck and find lifeboats that cannot be launched because the angle of the ship makes the davits unusable. Others jump into the Baltic Sea, where the water temperature is 10 to 11 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, hypothermia sets in within 30 minutes. Of the roughly 310 people who made it to the outer decks, nearly a third died of hypothermia, waiting to be rescued. At 1:50 a.m., approximately 50 minutes after the visor separated, the MS Estonia disappears from the radar screens of nearby ships. It has capsized and sunk in approximately 80 meters of water. 650 people are still inside. The first rescue ship, the Mariella, arrives at 2:12 a.m. The first helicopter arrives at 3:05 a.m. Survivors are found clinging to life rafts in the dark, in waves of 4 to 5 meters, in water cold enough to kill in half an hour. Many of the rafts have capsized. Some survivors spend 6 to 7 hours in the water before rescue. Of the 989 people on board, 137 are rescued alive. One dies later in hospital. 852 are dead. 7 people over the age of 55 survived. No child under the age of 12 survived. I want that to sit with you for a moment. Every child on this ship died. Every elderly person on this ship, with 7 exceptions, died. The disaster did not select randomly. It selected by strength, by position in the ship, and by the ability to climb through a structure that was rotating 90 degrees. If you were asleep in a lower cabin, you were dead before you understood what was happening. If you were in the bar on the upper deck at 1 in the morning, you had a chance. The Estonia killed 852 people, not because it hit an iceberg, not because it struck a reef, but because a steel door fell off the front of it and nobody could stop the water. The official investigation, conducted jointly by Estonia, Finland, and Sweden, concluded that the bow visor's locking mechanisms were under-designed for the route the ship was sailing. They found that the required inspection of the bow visor had never been performed. They found that the crew was slow to react, that the alarm was delayed, that no distress flares were fired, and that guidance from the bridge was minimal. They found that the ship's certificate of seaworthiness was based on an inspection that had not actually occurred. The disaster fundamentally changed maritime safety. The 1996 Stockholm Agreement imposed new stability requirements on ro-ro ferries operating in northern European waters. SOLAS regulations were amended to require stronger bow door constructions. Many ferry operators abandoned the upward opening visor design entirely, replacing it with fixed bows that eliminate the vulnerability. Emergency position indicating radio beacons were required to activate automatically. Voyage data recorders, the maritime equivalent of a black box, became mandatory. The wreck of the Estonia lies at 59 degrees north latitude, 21 degrees east longitude, at a depth of approximately 80 meters. In 1995, the governments of Estonia, Finland, and Sweden signed an agreement declaring the wreck site a sea grave and prohibiting any disturbance. This agreement was controversial. Many families wanted the bodies of their relatives recovered. The governments argued that the depth, the conditions, and the number of bodies made recovery impossible. Over 500 victims, more than half the dead, were Swedish citizens. Sweden, a nation that had not experienced a large disaster in modern memory, was profoundly traumatized. The front page of the newspaper, Aftonbladet, the day after the sinking carried a single word: Varför? Why? In 2020, a Swedish documentary crew used remotely operated vehicles to film the wreck and revealed what appeared to be a large hole in the hull that had not been described in the original investigation. This discovery reignited conspiracy theories that had circulated since 1994, including allegations that the ship was being used to transport military equipment and that the sinking was deliberate. A 2023 joint investigation by the three governments examined the hull and concluded that it was consistent with damage sustained during the sinking itself, not from an external explosion. The conspiracy theories persist. I am standing on the vehicle deck of the MS Estonia, and the cars are still parked neatly in their rows. In 30 minutes, the sea will be in here. The water will come through a door that was not built for this route, held by locks that were not inspected, on a ship whose certificate of seaworthiness was based on an examination that did not take place. Above me, 989 people are eating, drinking, dancing, sleeping, completely unaware that the steel door between them and the Baltic Sea was a disaster waiting to happen. That is a direct quote from the senior investigator of maritime accidents who examined the wreck. A disaster waiting to happen. 852 people paid for a ferry ticket and never arrived. Most of the world never learned their names. If this story deserved to be heard, like this video and subscribe. I am Arthur Graves, and I will see you at the next investigation.